This is Pamela Smythe from the University of Waterloo. I'm one of the hosts of Beyond the Bulletin, the podcast of internal communications at the university. We bring you news and views from the U-Waterloo community. Please spread the word that we're on SoundCloud.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And now the interview from episode 118 of Beyond the Bulletin, originally broadcast on February 11th, 2022. The Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics, or WISA for short, is the first institute of its kind in Canada to take on the challenge of making air transport sustainable. WISA plans to shape the future of the aeronautics industry at a pivotal moment for the sector and also the world's climate. It combines the work of about 50 researchers from each faculty to address every aspect of sustainability in aeronautics. Suzanne Kearns is a professor in the aviation program and discusses the many ways Waterloo students and faculty can make flying the wild blue yonder greener. Suzanne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So first off, what does sustainable aeronautics mean?
The easiest way to think of it is that we want to meet the needs of today without sacrificing future generations' ability to meet their needs. And that's the sustainable element of it. The aeronautics piece of it is really tapping into aviation, aerospace, and space. It's how do we move using air transportation to meet today's needs without having environmental, social, or economic impacts that are sacrificing our ability to do that over the longer term.
Well, when I think of sustainability in aeronautics, I'm thinking about, when you book a flight and you can buy carbon offset credits, it's got to be more than that.
Yeah, well, that's a part of it. And I think a lot of people have seen. But the reality is we want to move into the future in a way that is minimizing our reliance on those offsets. So when you buy those offsets, basically it's investing in another initiative that's taking carbon out of the atmosphere, which is a great thing to do. But really what we want to think about is how we can reduce the carbon that's produced at the source in aviation. And there's a lot of ways that can happen. So everything from more direct flight paths, because aircraft today still tend to follow more sort of legacy air routes, which have a bit of a zigzag pattern. So anytime we can optimize in a straight line, that's having an immediate impact on the amount of fuel burn. And that not only reduces emissions, but it also has tremendous economic savings because fuel is the biggest expense for airlines. We also look at aspects of, in the future, how are we going to meet some of these big emission reduction targets that have been set for the industry? They want to have carbon neutral growth only from 2019 onwards. So the amount of carbon produced in 2019 that will never go beyond that. So the growth will come by basically reducing carbon through other means. So in addition to offsets and air traffic modernization, we're looking at aspects of sustainable aviation fuels in a more immediate sense, potentially in the future looking at electric propulsion or hydrogen propulsion.
Are we going to see battery-operated jumbo jets?
Not in the short term. It looks sort of like the first 10 to 15 years, from now until 10 to 15 years, that the industry is suggesting that we can have more sustainable practices in that window through sustainable aviation fuels. So these are fuels that don't produce the same types of emissions as traditional fuels. But there's some questions around where do they come from? Are we taking feedstocks away that could be and should be used for other things? So that's sort of the first thrust to have more sustainable propulsion. The second is around electric aviation. So that's maybe 15 to 25 years in the future. But we did just put in a grant led by Dr. Paul Parker to see if we could purchase a small electric aircraft to be used in our flight training, because there are electric aircraft today. The Pipistrel is an example, but the nature of the battery power at this point is that you're only really feasible for very short flights. So our research is looking at how that could be used in flight training, because flight training tends to be shorter duration, lightweight aircraft. And then in the future, so you're kind of looking like 25 years plus, there's a lot of questions around whether hydrogen could be the solution. So there's some really tremendous, exciting opportunities in the future. But the reality is those targets that have been set are dependent on technologies and innovations that don't yet fully exist. And that's where Waterloo, I think, is going to have a really exciting role in the future.
Well, why does it make sense for us to have WISA at Waterloo?
Waterloo is host of Canada's largest undergraduate aviation program. So we train student pilots. And I always say the student pilots, they're my people. And they're probably I'm completely biased, but I think they're a really exciting group of students to work with. And not only do they complete their degrees, but they also go to the airport and complete their flight credentials, and they graduate as fully qualified pilots. And I think what's interesting about the aviation program is that there are very few programs like that in Canada in universities, that our colleges, like in an applied sense, have pilot training, but there aren't a lot of university level aviation programs. So Waterloo hosting Canada's largest, but also looking across campus and seeing the tremendous research strengths that we have on campus, and then pairing that with some of the big challenges facing the aviation and aerospace sectors. And all of a sudden it starts to come together to say, well, gosh, we have hundreds of student pilots who can participate in research as participants. And we also have all of this amazing research ecosystem that if we could only bring those strengths together, then we could have a really tremendous impact in the space.
So WISA is interdisciplinary?
It wouldn't function without being interdisciplinary. We define sustainability based on these sort of three pillars of sustainability. So social, environmental, and economic. And under social sustainability, we look at aspects of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Only about 5% of pilots are female. There are very few people of color in aviation careers. But also, most aviation accidents are caused by pilot error. So this aspect of human performance optimization, how do you create the workforce of the future that's trained, efficient, and ready to support what comes next? And that in the light of, before the pandemic, global shortages of aviation professionals, pilots, maintenance, air traffic control, everything in between. And we're seeing that reemergence today. So we think that the sustainability of the future of the air transport sector is going to require this emphasis on the people, both that it is impacted by and who support it as workers. The environmental sustainability pillar, we've talked about that already. So it's aspect of carbon and noise reduction and new technologies and even things like direct air capture of carbon and everything we can think about to be more environmentally friendly and reduce the negative impacts. But under the economic pillar, we really do, because we're Waterloo, we've got such amazing strengths in technology and AI. And what we're really focusing under that pillar is mobilizing those strengths to support the sector. Even aspects of things like cybersecurity. If you think about it, when you go to an airport, you have to go through all those security checkpoints. And yet, if somebody from their home computer is able to access aviation infrastructure, then all of that security protocol doesn't mean anything. It doesn't offer the protection. So a sustainable future from an economics perspective has to really have evidence-based, informed integration of technology. And that's where we see a lot of potential at Waterloo as well.
What led to the creation of WISA? Because you're the founding director.
There aren't a lot of aviation faculty, so I'm sort of the only full-time aviation professor on campus. And in working with my students, what increasingly kept happening is they would come up to me after class and they would say, I love aviation. I'm passionate about it. And most aviation people, it's like a hobby. It's like this strange obsession. Like they just love flight. But they're sort of pairing that with the idea that they don't want to be a part of an industry that's contributing to climate change. They don't want to be part of an industry that's part of the problem. And that really struck home for me. And we started really exploring aspects. So I taught a course on aviation sustainability and really tried to understand on a deeper level what sustainability means in air transportation. And then you look across, our faculty of environment and realize, well, gosh, we have world-leading experts in all of these, sustainability factors, and stretching beyond that across campus, you touch into science and engineering and math and arts and health. Like every faculty has expertise that helps us understand and contribute to doing things better. Aviation is a force for good in so many ways. And yes, we have negative environmental impacts, but very positive social and economic impacts. So aviation employs millions of people around the world. It moves over a third of the world's cargo by value. It's distributing critical infrastructure and medical equipment to aspects of the north. And there's so much, you think about supply chain issues as well, but there's so much that is happening that aviation is supporting in the background that you don't even see. And of course, the tourism aspect as well. I think we all understand the impact of being locked in our homes for these extended lockdowns for so long, that it affects you in many ways in a negative sense. So I used to be president of a group called the University Aviation Association,
Mm,
which represents hundreds of colleges and universities around the world that are aviation schools.
mm.
And I started increasingly see these legacy sort of leaders in the aviation space advertising for experts in cybersecurity or artificial intelligence or machine learning. And in recognizing that, there's this increasing awareness of a need in the space, and yet we have it on campus, plus we have hundreds of student pilots already here on campus, then it started to sort of fit together to say, well, gosh, if we could just mobilize the existing research capacity of all of our amazing colleagues and start directing it towards aviation and aerospace challenges, that we could have a real immediate impact.
How involved is industry?
So WISA, in forming the Institute, we also created an advisory committee. So Commander Chris Hadfield is an honorary advisor in that group, as well as Dr. Sanju Advani, who's an international leader in flight simulation, and several other just really amazing industry and government professionals who we meet about once a month and they offer advice and guidance. But we have a few also really incredible sponsorships with NavBlue, who's an Airbus company. They're just located on North Campus. And the idea is that that's how WISA sustains itself financially, is the industry partners will come to us and say, we have a research question, and WISA will work with them to refine it and create a request for proposals. And then we distribute that to all of our members, our researchers across campus, who prepare proposals and return them. And in that way, it's really trying to break down the barriers between industry and academia so that industry has sort of this open door to access this academic talent. And likewise, for our researchers, we also have about 7 airlines who are our members of WISA. And so if our researchers have questions that link to your operation, then we can facilitate that kind of communication flow. And that's been really valuable as well. People don't always realize that to be an aviation professional, either a pilot or air traffic controller, you also have to go and have a medical assessment at intervals, so once a year or so, depending on how old you are. And the challenge with this is it creates a bit of a culture where people might be very hesitant to disclose mental health issues, because if you do, you're putting your medical certificate on the line potentially, and then that might affect your ability to retain your employment. So it's not obviously intended to be that way. The medical process is meant to make the industry safer, to sort of identify if there are medical issues that might pose a risk or safety risk to the industry. But the flip side to it is that it does create this sort of the system where people are really hesitant to disclose mental health issues. And I know for certain that there are a tremendous amount of researchers who study aspects of mental health. How do you measure it? How do you track it? How do you understand if somebody needs help or if they're safe to continue operations? Like there's a lot of research in this space, and I think this is another aspect where I'll often say people like, tell me about your research, and I can tell you about how it fits a challenge in the air transport sector.
Oh,
And just very recently, in the past few months, there have been a few calls for research proposals internationally, looking for researchers to propose things of like, how can we both measure and support mental health in aviation? And one of the origins of WISA is saying, if the air transport sector, if all aviation and aerospace researchers had to start at the very beginning and learn lessons and sort of build up the answers on their own, it will take a tremendous amount of time. But if we can just tap people on the shoulder who are in parallel disciplines, who are already experts in the field, and just say, can you tell me the lessons you've learned and what has worked in other sectors, then we can take some significant strides forward.
now WISA is partnering with the Waterloo Wellington Flight Center, Awesome Flight Training Solutions, and the region of Waterloo International Airport to host a student design competition. Tell me a bit about that, and why did you want students involved?
If anyone has been observing that there's been an increasing amount of traffic at our local airport,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're expanding the terminal, and our flight school, the same school that trains our student pilots, They're one of the largest flight schools in Canada, and they're going to be required to move on the footprint of the airport to a different location. And so in sort of asking, what will our new building look like and what will our new facility look like? And of course, as researchers, we're hoping they will consider things like electric aircraft and what the charging infrastructure looks like and how to be more sustainable. It really did open the door to this question of, well, why don't we challenge our brilliant students to come up with solutions and to propose some of those designs? And the really exciting part of it is that students who participate agree to have the results hosted as open source on the WISA website so that when it's all said and done, other flight schools around the world could come to our website and start looking at some of these ideas and designs. And maybe that could be a catalyst to look at how flight training can be more sustainable in a very broad sense internationally.
Why did you want it to be open source?
That was really important to me because we want, of course, for it to be beneficial to our partner, the Waterloo Wellington Flight Center. But we want, WISA's mission is we always say we want aeronautics to be a force for good. We want to really optimize the good aspects of aviation and minimize the negative aspects. So the question of, well, gosh, if we could innovate flight training using things like virtual reality and flight simulators, we could probably make it more affordable, more effective, and customized to the learner. And therefore, we could really support these young people. Because I think the challenge is, we have this young people who are super passionate about aviation, but sometimes that creates really intense hardships because of the cost and sort of just really optimizing their ability to go flying.
What else is coming up for WISA?
So one of the big things we've been working on is a new education program. So it's called the Collaborative Aeronautics Program, or the CAP. And kind of the easiest way to think about it is it's almost like a minor in aviation that can be added to research-based master's and PhD programs. We hope if things go forward the way we do, we have to seek, of course, Senate approval, but we would hope that this program could launch in September of this year. And the concept is that it's adding a sort of dash aeronautics to the end of a degree. So you can get a PhD in geography dash aeronautics. So it's adding the dash aeronautics part. And what it actually, I'm really excited about.
Sell it.
It's a tremendously new idea for graduate level education in aviation, because instead of training people to be experts in aviation specifically, what we're doing is we're tapping other expertise. So they'll become disciplinary experts in their core discipline, whatever that happens to be across campus. And then those students will come together and they will do three things that are sort of aeronautics specific. There will be an introductory course that teaches basically all the structure and components of how aviation and aerospace works. The second course is a project-based course where we're going to ask industry partners to give us problems, like what are the big, on the horizon, what are big issues that need to be solved. And we'll assign those problems to teams of students to work on through the semester and present their solutions at the end. And then those students go back to their home departments and they have a research focus for their thesis or dissertation that is applicable to aviation or aerospace in a way that makes sense for their discipline. And then when they graduate, they get the dash aeronautics. But I think it's just going to be a really exciting way to mobilize the future of the industry, because the highly qualified personnel is like this next generation of leaders. They're going to need to know both the aviation space plus have the ability to answer some of these big emerging questions as well.
Wow, that does sound exciting. And you're also looking for people to be leaders at WISA.
We're going to have 4 associate directors who are also faculty members. And the associate directors were going to align with the different pillars of sustainability. So social sustainability, looking at human performance and that aspect, environmental sustainability, so carbon reductions and how we can optimize operations. And then economic sustainability, looking at aspects of sort of machine learning and AI and tech and engineering and how that can support the sector. And the 4th associate director we're looking for is going to be around a strategic initiative, which we've identified this year that we really would love to find someone who's passionate about drones, autonomous control, and or what's called eVTOL, or electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. These are like large human carrying drones. So they're really exciting, but they tap into so many different branches of expertise across campus. So we will be putting out a call for self-nominations. And if that sounds like anyone's expertise and things they're passionate about, we would love for them to consider joining us in that.
Any parting thoughts before we say goodbye?
I think the beautiful thing about Waterloo is this sort of coming together of opportunity and passion and sort of the research and the development of talent all sort of merging together to think about how we can future proof ourselves for what comes next. And I would just sort of throw it out there that there's some really big challenges the air transport sector is facing. Most of the professors who are part of WISA would not define themselves as aviation people. They're sort of they're disciplinary experts in their own field who are curious about applying their solutions to the air transport sector. So I think that if that sounds like anyone who's listening, then we would love for them to reach out and join us in our mission.
Suzanne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this interview from the Beyond the Bulletin podcast from the University of Waterloo. You'll find our archive of full episodes on the University of Waterloo website, and select interviews are on the university's YouTube channel. Just look for our playlist there. I hope you'll join Brandon Sweet and me for new episodes on Fridays, and please tell your Waterloo connections about us.